For some time I've wanted to tell some leelas about kirtan in beloved Adida's company. And the reason being is the area I live in northern New South Wales, Australia. It's a relatively alternative area with ashrams and communities and lots of alternative activities, and thereby it has kirtan events in the small towns surrounding the area in which I live. So I've been to some of these kirtan events, and the last time I went, a number of my friends asked, well, have you ever been to a kirtan before? And I said, well, yes, I have, in the company of my beloved guru, Heart Master Da, and described a little bit to them about it. And the kirtan in Adida's company is quite different to the kirtan that I went to in this Northern Rivers area. My recollection of these kirtans were that they were completely a magnet for his Hridaya Shakti, and in fact a means to whereby his Hridaya Shakti was magnified significantly. The one that comes to mind most is the evening Arati in Naitauba Island, and this was during the time I lived there from late 89 to 92. And it evolved over time, but in the beginning it started with the bell. One of the devotees, sometimes myself, sometimes somebody else, circled the village area of Naitauba with a loud bell. And as I recall, the meaning, not so much the meaning, but the import of that was that the devotee was, on behalf of the master, on behalf of all devotees, I guess, calling the day to an end and entering into the evening, and also possibly it has something to do with dispelling spirits at that time. I think also I've read an account that it was to do with calming the mind, calming thoughts. In any case, when this bell began, then devotees in the ashram all immediately knew that the Arati would begin soon, and we all made our way to the giving coat, which I think is now called Temple Adida. And when the pujarist with the bell entered the giving coat, everybody went wild, clapping, shouting, jumping up and down. The pujarist with the bell would stand in front of the murti, wildly ringing the bell, and there were other devotees waving lights around the murti for some time. And then that kind of raucous would calm down, and then the Arati chant would begin. And in those days we sung the chant in the original Sanskrit words, and it gained momentum. The last verse was always particularly ecstatic because we referred to Adida and Naitauba, as I recall. And then thereafter there was a period of quiet. In those days, everybody would hug each other after the Arati, men and women hugging each other, and then we would sit down and just be awash in Adida's blessing. Sometimes the Arati became particularly wild, and I recall that at times priests would take the full-size murti off the chair and circle the hall with the murti, and we all went totally fucking bananas, jumping up and down and calling out Adida's name. It felt literally, and not only felt, but became literally Adida circling the room. His murti became his form. His murti is his form, was his form, but it literally felt like he in person, in body, was circulating the giving code at that time. There are also times where the Shakti, Hridaya Shakti, was so intense that some devotees would go into wild kriyas, running around the hall, their bodies contorting into yoga postures which were seemingly impossible to do in a normal state. So it was a wonderful time, and during the 90s in particular, the 1990s, I was managing shipping and receiving. So sometimes in the evening, on a Friday evening, I had to wait down at Nukasa for the boat to come in, because it was my responsibility to ensure that everything that was important came off that boat and quickly went out to beloved, typically out at the Matrix. And sometimes this coincided with the Arati. And whilst I loved sitting at Nukusa with my Fijian friends waiting for the boat to come in, it was usually a very peaceful, happy time, because for me in particular, having busted my ass all week to ensure that everything got onto the boat, that was all done and dusted. The boat was on its way. There's nothing more I could do. I just had to give over. Hopefully everything was on the boat, so I wasn't too stressed. Mostly everything was on the boat. But for me, hearing that bell go off, it was somewhat torturous, because every cell in my being, my heart just longed to be in that Arati. And so it was somewhat torturous. But on the other hand, this was my service, so I went ahead and did the service. The other Arati event I recall fondly was in May 1990. It was when Adida spontaneously walked in to take into heart with the retreatants. And I was sitting in my office in Tangible Touch, the little wharf building, and I was very blessed to have a little room there facing directly out towards the wharf sign out into the ocean, where I used to sit and do computer work and make phone calls and so on. It was a hotbed, that particular office, because the general manager, Elliot, at the time was also in the building and fielding calls from the Kanyas and conversations with Beloved, and so it got very heated. But on this day it was particularly just calm, and I heard the retreatants, the tempo of their devotion increasing pretty significantly, and this wasn't uncommon. Mindless Company was close by, the retreatants' meditation hall, and this was a time when the retreatants were going wild, howling and yelling and shouting and all kinds of sounds like lions and creatures were commonplace. I noticed that, but didn't pay too much attention because I was doing my service. But then maybe I'll read from my diary at the time. It's an old diary, I think over 30 years old. Sri Gurudev, what a day. This afternoon you walked in to take into heart spontaneously. Even the Kanyas didn't know. So Beloved just got up out of his home in Indefinable and wandered over to take into heart, which was a building in the retreatant area. Well, I think it was a small chanting room at that time. I was in my office and I saw and heard of this, and then fellow devotee Cliff came and told me to get my ass in there, and I ran. Everyone was crowded around Gurudev chanting. I pushed my way to the front, and Sri Gurudev was doing his great blessing work. He just sat there for such a long time in his baba, with everyone absolutely going wild, shouting, chanting, just ecstatic with his bliss. At the end of this occasion, he stood up and looked at everyone, and he held the bowl of prasad water in his hand, and he threw water at all of us, and he tried to throw a whole bowl over us, and he dropped the bowl and smiled. In other words, he had this big bowl of water, and he was kind of throwing it out like this, and he tried to throw the whole bowl, threw some of it, but dropped the bowl on the ground. And then he smiled at us all. And then he walked out, and we all piled out and walked. And he walked down to Nukusa, and we sat meditating in his bliss, waiting for his return. And he walked past us all, blessing, cha, and he went back into the divine domain. What was interesting was the spontaneity of Beloved in this moment, just wandering freely, and it touched everybody who was present in a spectacular way. This is from the Two Secrets book, or the Secrets, the Two Secrets. This is a picture of Adida from that time, sitting in the front of Taken to Heart, in his samadhi. And Shawnee, or Brahmatrini Shawnee at the time, wrote this about the event, part of what she wrote. Heart Master Da Love-Ananda was sitting in his chair at the front of the room, radiating a tremendous bright energy to everyone. Everyone was captured by his beauty and the force of his blessing. Devotees were sitting, standing, kneeling. Many were chanting. Some were weeping wildly at the sight of the God-man Da sitting before them, and others were calling out in ecstasy. Some were meditating silently in the midst of this blissful madness. So thanks for listening, and yeah, as I said, Arati in the Divine World Teacher Adida company is quite different to the Arati I have gone to in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. Da.